Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness left the good doctor in a bit of a precarious position, which might leave some fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe wondering what the future of the character might look like, when we might see him next. Well, I actually have a few ideas for that. Ideas that I'd love to talk about in this very video. Of course, any discussion of Strange's future is gonna involve spoilers for Multiverse of Madness, so if you haven't seen it yet, maybe sit this one out and come back to the video later on after you've watched it. You won't regret it. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Let's start this video off by talking about the mid-credit scene and where things might go from there. You know the one that I'm talking about, the one with the light-haired woman in the fancy purple outfit who showed up to whisk Strange away on some grand adventure. Not the one featuring Pizza Papa Bruce Campbell finally being able to stop beating the crap out of himself. I wanted to do an entire video exploring the lore possibilities for Pizza Papa, but the higher-ups at CBR shot my pitch down, so that's sadly not gonna happen. That light-haired woman is presumably Clea, the leader of and Sorcerer Supreme for the Dark Dimension, niece to Dormammu and longtime love interest of Strange in the comics. Now, in that scene, she states that Strange caused a convergence event, and they needed to go to fix it, seemingly perfectly setting up the plot for a third Doctor Strange movie. And that might very well be the case. I mean, the setup for a plot is basically perfect. But if I had to venture a guess, that's probably not what we'll see in a future Strange 3. I just kind of feel like it's almost too straightforward of a plot for a Marvel movie. I know, it's not like Marvel does overly complicated, super twisty and turny storylines, but you get what I mean. Instead, they'll probably do like they did with Thor Ragnarok. At the end of Age of Ultron, it sounded like Thor was gonna go off on some grand adventure to find all the Infinity Stones, only for the beginning of Ragnarok to establish that he gave that venture up, and now he was off doing some other stuff. So if I were a betting man, I'd say that the next time we catch up with Doc Strange, him and Clea will have already fixed that whole situation and have established a bit of a working relationship with one another. Instead, I think we're gonna get another Clea-focused storyline as the plot of the next movie. In the comics, after Dormammu was ousted as ruler of the Dark Dimension, Clea's mother Umar took over, and wasn't exactly much better than her brother was. So Clea, alongside Strange and a handful of others, stepped up to the plate and usurped her, with Clea taking a seat on the throne instead. This is something that could work within the MCU. With some slight modifications, of course. Instead of having Umar be the big bad, they could very easily just leave Dormammu in charge of the Dark Dimension. This would make some fans very happy, as quite a few people have talked over the years about how odd it was that one of the biggest members of Strange's Rogues Gallery only appeared on film for about 5 minutes and didn't really do much. So giving Dormammu the chance to be an actual antagonist, not just a formless mass that serves only to raise the stakes for some other bad guy, would be pretty freaking awesome. And it'd allow for some more exploration of Clea as a character, since the entire plot would be tied so intrinsically to her history. Of course, I could be totally wrong, and they could just go with the whole convergence thing like they seem to be setting up, which would potentially set the stage for an adaptation of a pretty famous comic storyline. Anytime that anyone brings up the idea of a convergence, a cataclysmic combination of different universes, Secret Wars ultimately comes up. So let's talk about Secret Wars, specifically the 2015 one, since that's the one that Doctor Strange actually played a relatively prominent role in. In that storyline, the mainline comic continuity and the Ultimate Universe were smashed together, becoming a twisted reality known as Battle World. Ruled over by God Emperor Victor Von Doom, Strange wound up serving as his right hand, his sheriff of sorts. Eventually, a combined force made up of characters from both universes, led by 2 different versions of Reed Richards, stood up against Doom, and Richards managed to defeat it, while restoring the multiverse back to the way it was before. Now, an MCU adaptation of the story probably wouldn't take place in Doctor Strange 3, as while Strange does play a big part in the story, he's not really what I would argue is the main character of it. In fact, spoiler alert for Secret Wars, he dies in it. So, probably not going to be a Strange movie. But I could see it as a big team-up, an Avengers sort of film kind of deal. But it could still serve as the next place that we see Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch in interviews hinted at the idea of maybe taking a bit of a break from playing Strange for a little while, though he was adamant that he would return in the future. And I can't really blame the guy for wanting to take a break. All of his appearances within the MCU, with the exception of his cameo in Ragnarok, have been of major significance, so he's probably a bit tuckered out at this point. So maybe Strange will go missing after leaving with Clea, and then during Phase 5, or whenever they get around to adapting the storyline, we'll find them on Battleworld, having been stranded there during their attempt to stop another convergence. Now, this is admittedly purely speculation. There's basically no grounding in anything that I could use as proof to say that this is what they're gonna do, but hey, what's wrong with a little bit of speculating every once in a while? Of course, Secret Wars wouldn't really work if we didn't first get some major setup via the Fantastic Four movie that we are getting at the end of this current phase. And that in of itself could give us another place where Strange, or at least a hint at Strange, could pop up, as Marvel's first family is now somewhat tied to Doctor Strange within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, given the fact that the first member of that family made their debut in one of his movies. Well, okay, if you really want to split hairs here, technically the first member of the Richards family actually debuted during the final episode of Loki, since Kang is the distant descendant of Reed Richards. But you get what I mean here. When I'm talking about the family here, I'm not talking about the physical Richards family. I'm talking about the Fantastic Four as a team. Now, I can't imagine that Strange would, if he appears in their solo film at all, play any kind of a major role in the main plot of the movie. It just wouldn't make the most sense in the world to have such a magic-focused character hanging around in a movie that will presumably have more to do with science fiction than anything else, considering the nature of the team's origins. And yes, I know that Doctor Doom, who will presumably be the main baddie of the movie, is a magic user, so there will be a little bit of it in there anyways, but you get what I mean here. Also, Marvel doesn't really like having outside heroes playing a big role in debut movies. Off the top of my head, only Spider-Man Homecoming did this, but even then, Iron Man wasn't super essential to the general story of that film, only really providing character development stuff for Peter Parker. So if that's the case, why would I even say that Strange could pop up in their movie in some way, other than the fact that Richards had a little cameo in Doctor Strange's previous film? A cameo, by the way, that ended in probably the most disturbing popping sound that's ever existed in the history of sound design. Seriously, that popping sound is currently living rent-free in my head. Well, picture this for a second. During the end credits scene, Reed and Sue and whoever else are hanging out, enjoying themselves after a major battle with Doctor Doom or Namor the Submariner or whoever winds up being the antagonist of the movie. And suddenly, a portal to the multiverse tears open within their apartment in the Baxter Building, out of which pops a rather distraught and beat-up looking Clea. As the team try to come to grips with what is happening in front of them, Clea locks eyes with Reed, telling him that Strange is in trouble and he told her to find the smartest man in the world. This would be a great way to not only set up Secret Wars, laying the groundwork for some massive multiversal threat that only a Reed Richards or two could solve, but also be a nice throwback to the way in which MCU Strange was introduced to Richards from Earth 838, where Mordo referred to him as the smartest man. I guess it would kind of be the inverse of that scene, with Reed being pseudo-introduced to Strange by being called that by somebody else. Interesting little dynamic there. Based on the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, Cumberbatch seems to be interested in taking a bit of a hiatus from the MCU, this could give him quite a break, as the Fantastic Four film is currently slated to be one of the final movies of Phase 4, with only Blade coming after, if I'm not mistaken. Which I might very well be by the time you watch this video, since Disney's release schedule seems to change just about every other day. So by the time this is posted, I might be totally and completely wrong. That's show business for you. Either way, I think it would be a cool little way to show us that Strange and Reed will meet again. And when they do, I sure hope that Strange has a bit of a chat with him about how much of a jerk the Illuminati were to him on that alternate Earth. Or maybe he'll have thought that the idea of the Illuminati was a great idea, and he'll team up with Reed to start the mainline MCU version of them, hoping to learn from the mistakes of that other world, which was basically just don't mess with Wanda Maximoff. But I mean, I guess it's not really that hard to do anymore. Or is it? Now, I suppose I should probably address the elephant in the room, or rather the eye on the forehead, I guess. Multiverse of Madness left Strange in an odd state, seemingly somewhat corrupted by dark magic due to him having used the Darkhold to dreamwalk into his dead variant during the climax of the movie. That is definitely something that future Doctor Strange stories are gonna have to deal with. The first idea for what could be done with this is probably the most simplistic. If the sequel does indeed have Strange running around with Clea, trying to save the multiverse, we could see her helping him learn how to control his dark corruption, allowing him to turn a curse into a benefit. Would be a bit of an inverse from the comics, where Strange trained Clea in the mystic arts when she was living on Earth, as her powers became drained the longer she stayed away from the dark dimension. So that'd be an interesting way to take that classic relationship dynamic and completely upend it, while also dealing with something that the character is going through. Of course, there are less than simple ways that this storyline could go as well. One fan theory that I've seen floating around posits that the third eye isn't actually Strange's. The idea here is that it is actually controlled by Chthon, one of the many angled ones and the creator of the Darkhold. In the comics, Chthon was said to be able to use the Evil Book to, in a sense, communicate with worlds outside of his own, and could even directly manipulate anyone who reads from it. That's why so many of us assumed that Wanda Maximoff in Multiverse of Madness was gonna be under the control of some other extraplanar being, instead of just being revealed to be straight up a bad guy. Yeah, you can really see how that worked out for us. Despite the fact that we were wrong in that instance, that doesn't mean that Disney and Marvel couldn't still use this general idea for a future plotline. Imagine if they find out that Chthon has been watching Strange for a while, looking for an opportunity to seize total control of him and use him for Chthon's dark ends, only to be thwarted by Clea, the Sorcerer Supreme of the Dark Dimension, as well as maybe a few other Sorcerer Supremes from other planes of existence, since there are actually quite a few of them. Maybe this will be something that we see way down the line. That way characters such as Magic, a mutant and Sorcerer Supreme of Limbo, could also play a part in things. Of course, there are countless other possibilities for where they could go with the whole third eye thing. I've seen a few people suggest that this is a hint at a future appearance of Agamotto, with the whole Eye of Agamotto thing being taken very literally in this case. Either way, this is something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, if for no other reason than to try to save Marvel a little bit on their CGI budget so that they don't have to be constantly comping a third eye onto Cumberbatch's forehead. Finally, I wanted to take this opportunity to muse a little bit more on the idea of what a future Midnight Suns team-up project could look like. Fans of this channel more than likely know that I've been pretty much talking non-stop about my love for Midnight Suns, and how much I would love to see them brought to the big screen. Or heck, even the little screen. I'd take a Disney Plus show. But after seeing Multiverse of Madness, the idea of how it could happen has to change just a little bit. Remember earlier on when I talked about the idea of having a future Strange movie focus on him setting out to help Clea claim the throne of the Dark Dimension for herself? Well, that right there could be the perfect way to bring on this supernatural super team. What if Strange, when faced with the concept of having to take on such an imposing and powerful being as Dormammu, figures that he's gonna need some additional help in order to achieve victory? He could very easily turn around and start recruiting members who specialize in the supernatural, in the magical side of the MCU, assembling the Midnight Suns. Wong would be an easy get for the roster, obviously. America Chavez could tag along as well, especially now that she has started training in the mystic arts. Multiverse of Madness also gave us the first appearance of Rintra the Minotaur, who could jump in and be an actual character this time around. Blade will have had his solo movie by this point, assumedly, so he could fit, as would Moon Knight. Both of these characters have been members of the team in the comics, so having them in the MCU variant would just feel right. And if Blade is coming along, Dane Whitman, aka the Black Knight, could come along as well, since Blade technically made his MCU debut as a voice speaking to Whitman during the end credits scene in the Eternals. Heck, even the variant Loki from his solo series could tag along, depending of course on what goes on in the second season of his show. Of course, there are other characters who could probably also fit the roster who might be introduced here in a little bit, but those are the first ones that popped into my head while I was writing this script, so that's what I'm gonna go with. Now sure, in the comics the team never actually fought against Dormammu, But considering the fact that we have yet to get any solid hints at the existence of either Mephisto or Lilith within the MCU, Dormammu could serve as a fairly decent replacement baddie. I mean, just look at this guy. That's probably the most demonic looking bad guy that we're probably going to see in the MCU, at least for a little while. Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets. I made this video and I want to know what you think. What do you think the future holds for Doctor Strange? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos just like this in the future.